الرحمن الرحيم ما كان على النبي من حرج فيما فرض الله له سنة الله في الذين خلوا من قبل وكان أمر الله قدرا مقدورا الذين يبلغون رسالات الله ويخشونه ولا يخشون أحدا إلا الله وكفى بالله حسيبا بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والشمس وضحاها والقمر إذا تلاها والنهار إذا جلاها والليل إذا يغشاها والسماء وما بناها والأرض وما طحاها ونفس وما سواها فألهمها فجورها وتقواها قد أفلح من زكاها وقد خاب من دساها كذبت ثمود بطغواها إذ انبعث أشقاها فقال لهم رسول الله ناقة الله وسقياها فكذبوه فعقروها فدمدم عليهم ربهم بذنبهم فسواها ولا يخاف عقباها صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, and thank you for tuning in. My name is Ali Basit and my co-host
is on mute.
is on mute.
My name is Huda.
And you're watching The Power of Words, a conversation with poets, authors, and translators. This panel is the fifth in a series of panels hosted by none other than the Thaqalain Muslim Association at the University of Toronto St. George campus, University of Toronto Scarborough campus, and Queen's University.
And before we get started, we wanted to acknowledge that while this event is virtual, we recognize that our universities are situated on the lands of Indigenous nations, specifically the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations. These territories are included in the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between Indigenous peoples of this land to care for the land and water and take from it only what one needs while leaving enough for others. From a Muslim perspective, this doesn't sound too different from the role assigned to us by God to be guardians of the earth and to not be wasteful. And we hope that everyone can join us in being mindful of the land and water that we all share, inshallah.
Inshallah. Thank you for the land acknowledgement, Sister Huda. For today's panel, we'd like to welcome three prolific writers, authors, and, as you know, translators to hear about their journeys and what they love about writing and language, but also some of the challenges they experience and the connection between Islam and their work. A warm welcome for Sister Sahar Jaber, Brother Taher Adel or Adel, and Sister Nazmina Dhanji. Now, before we get into all this, it's a pleasure to meet you all. How are you? How are you all doing? I hope you're having a wonderful Saturday morning, as I am, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum. Well, it's not morning here, it's afternoon.
Oh, is it?
I'm glad to be here, honored to be invited as a panelist. I'm looking forward to answering the questions and listening in, see what the other panelists have to say.
Inshallah. And I think no one else is trying to comment on that.
No, it's a beautiful morning for sure.
Inshallah. So starting with Sister Sahar, she was born and raised right here, local in Ontario, Canada. She's completed a double honors in sociology and communications. She resided in Lebanon, where she studied Islamic education for a few years, or Islamic studies. And currently she is in the pursuit to create an impact in Muslim children's literature. She started a publications company, Figs and Olives Publications. She has recently published her first book titled, But Why is Hijab So Special? The main goal of the publishing company is to provide reliable and educational resources for parents and children to build a strong Islamic foundation. Her dreams and aspirations in life are to empower the Muslim generation to continue through literature and knowledge, beaconing the message of our dear Prophet to learn and spread knowledge to the best of one's abilities. Brother Taher Adel, who just corrected me and let me know that he is not related to Adele, I believe, a British. I don't know much about Adele. I'll leave that aside. Brother Taher Adel is a British Bahrainian poet and spoken word artist. You might already know him. He has a bachelor's in engineering and biomedical engineering from City University, London, and an MA in creative writing and poetry from the University of East Anglia. I hope I said that right. He is an Arts Council of England's poet in residence for Wells Next to the Sea, the author of a poetry collection by the title Lost and Found. His poetry has also been published in international journals, literary magazines, anthologies, most notably in Ambit, Smoke Magazine, the New European, Poetry London, and Poetry Salzburg Review. As you can see, I can't say anything to make that more extravagant. He's clearly been doing a lot of work, alhamdulillah. Sister Nazmina Dhanji, the founder of Arabic Online, is a busy multitasking mother of 4. She's a polyglot who speaks 7 languages and is an Arabic grammar nerd. Needless to say that Arabic happens to be her favorite language. She enjoys swimming and cycling, much like myself, in her spare time, and works from. She is also the author of the book 50 Quranic Comforts for Mums, and a published translator of many works from Arabic to English. She's been heading the Department of Arabic Studies in Al Mahdi Institute in Birmingham, which I believe is in London, for Chartered Institute of Linguists. Having taught Quranic Arabic in classrooms across North London for many years, she is super excited about bringing her courses online to help people connect to the Quran on a deeper level through beautiful, beautiful language. One can only imagine how difficult it is to be a mother of four on its own, but to be tackling or to be heading a department simultaneously, I'm sure is a task few can take on. Now, that's a short summary. I know it may sound like a lot, but that's a very short summary on what our dear panelists have been doing and can talk to us about. So we're here to get an in-depth perspective into their fields and careers. Let's head over to Sister Huda, who's going to explore some of their inspirations.
All right, so let's dive in by getting to know each of you a little bit better and hearing about your motivations for taking the path of literature and language. Let's start with Sister Sahar. Within the past year, you've started your own publishing company called Figs and Olives, which is a name that I absolutely love, and you published a book called But Why is the Hijab So Special? So as I understand it, the drive to pursue this came from both a need you saw within yourself and also within your community. Can you tell us from your perspective about what inspired you to start this publication company and write the book?
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for having me on your platform. I'm very honored and grateful for this opportunity amongst everyone and amongst the respective brothers and sisters. Really, Figs and Olives, Tini was Zaytun, is where the inspiration came from. And starting a publications company was something that I really honored since I was a kid. Literature was always something that I was in love with. However, I always felt like I was not a part of the narrative or not a part of the literature. I wore the hijab when I was maybe 8 years old because I randomly had a splurge of love for the hijab and I just decided to wear it. However, in Niagara Falls, where I grew up, there was literally no other hijabi in the school other than me and my sister. So let alone there was no literature on the subject, and there was a lot of racism towards the hijab. Speed track 15, 20 years, when I became pregnant with my now son, I never knew what to expect, if it was a daughter, if it was a son, but I knew that the first thing that I would want my son or my child to have was literature that had their narrative. And I felt like it was really a dishonor if I don't actually do my part with my background in Islamic studies and my background in communications and sociology to actually put forward something that can benefit the community. So really, Figs and Olives, although it's a career, I don't treat it as a career. I really treat it as a responsibility that I have in the community.
I love that. I love that, you saw where your skills lie and where the need was and what your passion was, and you brought those together to create something so special. Sister Nazmina, before this event, I actually had never heard the word polyglot. And so I wanted to clarify for those in the audience that it means someone who knows multiple languages. And Sister Nazmina is not only a polyglot, but she's a polyglot who knows 7 languages, mashallah, as we'd mentioned. So I think you must have so much patience and determination. But what inspired you to learn multiple languages, and why did you decide to engage in translating different material? Nope, you're on mute.
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Firstly, it's a real honor to be here amongst you all and my esteemed panelists, Brother Taher and Sister Sahar. So in terms of languages, I had a head start in that I could speak 3 languages as a young child of Indian heritage growing up in France and Madagascar. So I could speak Gujarati, French, and Malagasy. English was actually my 4th language, which I learned at the age of 9. I learned Urdu, Farsi, and Arabic in my teens, and also Spanish. And then I went on to study Arabic at university level. So I did a degree in Arabic, and then I've been kind of immersed in Arabic ever since. So for the last 20 years. Tells you how old I am. But my inspiration behind learning Farsi and Arabic was actually a trip to Iran when I was 16. And, you know, just full of zeal for Islam and wanting to learn more and wanting to read. And we were taken to an Islamic bookshop that had many books translated into English. And I brought back a whole suitcase full of books, but I was quite frustrated by a lot of them because the sentence structures, the vocab used, they just weren't enjoyable to read. I couldn't get into them because the translation wasn't done by native speakers of English, right? It was done kind of the opposite way to how you're supposed to translate. And so there was very little high quality material out there at the time for English speaking Muslims. So from the beginning, my dad had always instilled in us that when we choose a career, you've got to think about what's going to help serve Islam and serve Muslims at the same time. So I went ahead and studied Arabic language and literature with modules in history and translation theory. And then further training in translation, got accredited by the Chartered Institute of Linguists. So that's like the formal professional standards agency in the UK. And yeah, it just went on from there. So the motivation to learn was actually, for myself, being able to read Islamic literature in Arabic.
Yeah, and like I think a lot of people can relate to reading a book that's been translated, but doesn't always make sense or doesn't really capture that idea. And I think it's such useful work to be able to translate that work and get the essence of the book really out of it. So, Brother Taher, you completed a Bachelor of Biomedical Engineering, and now you're on the path towards becoming a full-time poet. So science and arts sort of coming together. Can you tell us when you got into poetry and what made you realize that that's sort of the path that you wanted to take?
Yeah, but just to address the misconceptions earlier in the introduction, I'm not related to Adele. We both coincidentally have beautiful singing voices, but that's as much as the relationship goes. But secondly, I hear my son in the background, so if he stumbles in and everybody sees him, my apologies. But in terms of motivations for taking the path of literature and language, for me, it kind of naturally fell into place quite early on. I was always in love with the power of language and the world of imagination, and poetry is basically a combination of both, really. And I was naturally inarticulate, so I could not express myself verbally. And you're going to see this today on the panel. I struggle to articulate myself unless it's on paper and it's written down. And that was me growing up. So I'd have verbal arguments with my siblings. I'd lose those arguments. But then I'd sit down, write them down, and end up, spinning the whole argument against them. So for me, poetry started off as an outlet, trying to wrap my head around the more complex questions in life. So my relationship with God, for instance, the fragility of life and death. And then that's when I realized I can cram so much of these complex ideas into such few words. And that's when I realized the beauty of language, and that set me on the path of writing more. So I started writing poetry, sharing it on forums. So forums for those in the, what do we call them, the Zenji generation, or the Gen Z. God knows, I'm showing my age here, I'm a 30-year-old. But forums were social media before social media was social media. So we used to write on forums as kids and share them with the world. So we had a little community forum, and I started writing my first poem publicly at around 16, but there's a whole story I'll get into later, hopefully, of how I really started writing poetry and why. But fast forward, and now I've taken up a master's in creative writing and poetry. I published my first book, and I'm on the cusp of publishing 2 more, hopefully by the end of 2021. So yeah, that's a summary of how I got it.
MashaAllah. I think that's an amazing lesson in, being persistent. When something that you love, even if you're not good at it, persistence and practice and really taking on that passion can really take you far. So we'll move on to the next section, inshallah.
Yeah, now, Brother Taher, just clarified this much. Do you sing Adele songs? That's, I think, the main question.
I don't sing Adele songs, but I do sing in the shower. And I think that's my second talent that nobody knows about. So yeah. I'd like to say I'm a self-professed singer, but I didn't manifest into a talent.
Inshallah. So now that we've gotten to know you each just a little bit better, we'd like to hear a little bit more about what your work entails. So, Brother Taher, just to continue with yourself, you know, many of us can rhyme a couple words or sentences and so on and so forth, but not many of us can say, you know, call ourselves professionals or anything of the sort. Can you share with us a glimpse into the life of a professional poet, and what are some of the main tasks and duties? But also, how does one go, you know, taking their passion and hobby, or you know, their poetry skills from a hobby to a professional level?
For sure. I think I'll preempt that question first and say there's no such thing as a professional poet these days or a full-time poet. We're not living in the medieval times of Shakespeare or you know the golden age of Arabia, where you got paid to write poetry, or in London as we call them bards, about you know the kings and sultans. So in this case, for me, if I could just go kind of rewind to how my journey started, and I think a lot of the students out there or people interested in poetry will have similar stories, but don't know that it's a talent per se, and they don't know how to develop it. So for me, it all came about accidentally, and I think people can take some virtue from that. But so I started writing poetry at the age of 16, like I mentioned earlier, but I only discovered that I can write 2-3 years prior to that. So I was in secondary school, and in the UK, I don't know about the syllabus in Canada when it comes to English literature and language, but we in the UK are basically thrown into the deep end of poetry anthologies, and these are poems that are written by middle-aged white men that we can't relate to. So we never ever grow any sort of affinity towards these poems or poetry in general. So I remember in English class, we were shown this anthology, and I absolutely hated poetry in English language completely. And we were told to regurgitate, to understand what the poet meant. And I'm 90% sure that's not what the poet meant. But yeah, we had to kind of, you know, analyze and critique poetry and poets of 500-600 years ago, or even 100 years ago. So to cut the story short, a teacher of mine gave us a homework, and we had to mimic this one poem from the anthology in our own words, and it had to mirror that poem. So we were set that task, and I'm notorious for not doing my homework. And I thought, you know what, to get the teacher off my back, let me do this one. And I chose a poem, I think it was called Titchborne's Elegy. And that was the only poem that I could relate to. And if you've got time later on, you could look at it. But it's so the story of this poet was that he was sentenced to death, and he was to be executed tomorrow. So he was put into a dungeon, and dungeons are grim places. So he was stuck in this dungeon, and he wrote a poem about fragility of life. And that was the first time that I could relate to a poem or to a poet. And I'm thinking, oh my God, there's a poet that wrote it in the final moments before he's executed. And he's 500 years old, and he's just written something that's touched me. So I decided to write my very own version. I mimicked it like almost identically, but it was my own take. So I handed this in excitedly. And the first thing my teacher told me is that I plagiarized, it's not my work. And that she couldn't believe that I had written it. So I was punished at that time, about 13 years of age, for writing something that was good enough to be considered plagiarism. And then I hate poetry even more after that. But at the back of my mind, I thought to myself, if my teacher thought I plagiarized, then it must be good enough. It's good enough to be considered, you know, as somebody who could write, you know, poems of that caliber. So it always stayed at the back of my head. And like I mentioned earlier, at 16, I started sharing these poems online, and people were supporting me and encouraging me. So if anybody's out there that is shy about sharing their work, always put it out in public in one form or another, because sometimes we have these little egos, or we need self-confidence to know that our poetry or our writing needs to be recognized for us to recognize ourselves. So in terms of ambitions to be a full-time poet, I never wanted to be a full-time poet. I wanted to be a footballer, and obviously I wasn't talented enough to be a footballer. And my parents wanted me to be a doctor, so that didn't work out because I was too stupid to be a doctor. So I kind of went halfway and became a medical engineer. And that was a course that was newly opened by the Queen at the time. It was a combination of engineering and medicine. And I was fixated with Iron Man, and in technical terms, Iron Man was a medical engineer. So I was thinking, I want to be what he was doing. And obviously he's a fictional character. So I'd done medical engineering. But while I was doing that, I was constantly writing in the background and sharing my poetry and reciting publicly and getting into spoken word. So I developed on the side until many years later, I was approached by a university telling me that I should apply for their scholarship program and get into creative writing as a part-time course. And that was at the same time I was publishing my first collection of early poems. So that's how I accidentally got into being what we call a full-time poet. And I think did you mention a question about what it entails? So full-time poetry normally entails publishing your work, having your work published in literary journals, magazines, getting approached for panels like these, workshops, so a lot of workshops. So I carry out workshops for children, workshops for pensioners and elderly people, so believe it or not, and residencies. So I don't know if Canada has residencies, but when you write enough poetry, eventually they make you the resident poet in the area. So I'm currently I was a resident poet, sorry, in a rural area called Well-to-See, and it's just full of old people where I carry out workshops for old people. But that's how I got into kind of being a professional poet. And my ambitions, hopefully, is to kind of plug away at it, eventually becoming my full-time career, because I enjoy it more than I enjoy my day-to-day job.
Yeah, that's wonderful stuff. The only residency I'm aware of is, I think everyone's the resident poet of their own house.
Yeah, that's how I started. Eventually, I expanded.
Right. Also, I guess what you said, or the main takeaway was, the best poetry is usually written before you're executed.
Yeah. I'm just waiting for that time, for that that landmark poem that makes me famous. But like I said, it's very difficult to be a professional poet. So unless you're an internet sensation like Ruby Core, and then funded by a whole marketing machine, you're not really going to make a living out of poetry. But you can slowly work to be a full-time poet, where you publish work on the side, eventually get paid to do workshops, residencies, and other pieces of work. Like I've reached a stage now where I get commissioned to write about art pieces, and I'm not even a fan of art, but they're like, see what you're seeing and just write about it. I was like, okay, you're going to pay me to write about an art piece, I'll do that. But these are the type of things you can eventually do the more you kind of experience the world of poetry.
Right. So for all the next art events, I guess we'll be reaching out to get some poetry for those. Sister Sahar, can you tell us about the process of publishing a book? What do people need to consider when they're thinking of authoring a book?
So there's two ways someone can actually publish a book, or technically now there's three. You can either publish with a company, and so you sell your product to them, and then you get a royalty every time it's sold, or they just pay you upfront. Generally, those are hard to get and hard to get in, and you don't make a lot of money because they're going to give you a very small royalty fee, like let's say 10% or less. Out of the net worth of what's coming in. So after all payments are done. So it's very small. The next way is actually to go on like something like Ingram Spark, where you kind of self-publish, or you can't say it's self-publishing, but you put your book out there, and then Ingram Spark works as your distributor, and it sells to a lot of stores. However, the opportunities is very low because there's so many books available on Ingram Spark. And then the third way, obviously, is to start your own company and pursue it. However, if you're doing that, that means you're not going to be able to work on actually writing books as much, because now you're actually in the business side of it as well, which is a lot of work. I decided to pursue the third one just because I wanted this to become something I can always do in the future, and something I can always work on. And I felt like it just matched my lifestyle the most. Again, it's a lot of work. So if someone doesn't want to have all that business of actually advertising and creating and contacting like over 100 different places and bookstores and schools to sell your book and, you know, ship them and distribute them and liabilities, then I wouldn't encourage that. But generally, if you did decide to go about publishing your own book, you'd then have to contact a printing company. I sourced it in China. And so you source it somewhere and then you get a freight forwarder, an agent, they arrange shipments for you, they reach, and you have to obviously have a big enough amount for a down payment and for paying for the illustrators, paying for the editors, paying for a lot of things and a lot of losses as well that you don't expect. So yeah, it's a lot of work, but if it's just like any other business, if it's something that you want to do, it's possible for sure.
Yeah, this one's seeming like it's definitely the riskier option of the three. A lot of investing and
yeah, it is. I've unfortunately lost a lot of money through things that just were unforeseen. But alhamdulillah, you learn for the next book and you learn for upcoming things. Honestly, you have to come with the open mind that you're gonna lose money, and the other portion of it is that you actually don't even make that much money when you sell books. So it's definitely not something that you can pursue. As Brother Taher was saying, even though you're going into a career path like this, you really have to have that open mind that you're not going to be able to do this sustainably all on its own. And so, because I also do a lot of mentorships and a lot of lectures and workshops on the hijab with girls, so that takes a lot of time from me being able to actually put back into the business for sure. So yeah, it's a lot.
Right. So just very quickly, for aspiring authors, should they just write something, publish on something like Amazon to get started?
The way Amazon works is Amazon takes 3 different payments from you. So they're going to be taking a payment that you're going to be making a monthly fee, and then they're going to be taking half of what your thing costs on Amazon, and then they're actually be taking a storage fee. You literally make nothing off of Amazon. You make like, honestly, you make like just a couple of like $5 if you're selling it for like 25. Or like maybe $8 max. But really, what I'm trying to say is, if someone is trying to pursue publishing, I don't want to discourage it, but I want to be real about it. You can't pursue it thinking you're going to be able to make this as a full income, especially not right away. It has to be down the line, maybe 5-10 years from now, you'll actually have a sustainable income. However, in the beginning, you have to be able to actually sustain yourself a different manner, because when you sell a book, you have to have the regular price per how much you sell it. Say you sell it for $30. Bookstores won't buy that from you for $30. They're going to want half of it or more, like 55% discounted. You're going to sell it to them for $15. The book might have cost you $5, $7 to sell. You're only going to be making $6 a book. So it really has to be rationalized that when you go to pursue something like this, you have to have higher goals. And if your goal is money, then I wouldn't be that hopeful right away, maybe down the line. However, if your goal is to actually just encourage the youth, make literature, create something aspiring, then it's tremendous amount of rewards, like unbelievable amount of rewards.
Right. So incredible passion, and probably take a course on business.
I actually didn't take a business course at all, but
We'll work your way through.
YouTube videos for sure. YouTube videos.
Okay, or YouTube videos. Sister Nazmina, you've translated many books from Arabic to English, one of them being multi-volume book of tafsir, which is very interesting, Tafsir al-Abashi. Can you share with us what goes into translating a book, and what does the job of a translator look like?
Okay, so translation, at the moment, the focus of my work is Arabic online, so I teach Arabic. So translation's kind of on the back burner at the moment, though I do have a couple of projects in the pipeline. But basically, with translation, it's actually not enough to know 2 languages thoroughly. So for example, I translate primarily from Arabic into English. But you have to have an area of specialization, because there's very little work in just general translation. So you've got to specialize. Politics or journalism, medicine, legal translation, pharmaceuticals, engineering, technology, there's every field you can think of, and literature, poetry, because they all come with their own technical terms, textbooks, dictionaries. So it's not enough just to know languages. So my specialization is literature and classical Islamic texts, classical Islamic law, hadith, Quran. So I have to make sure that aside from knowing the languages and, and keeping up with that, I have to read a lot and, kind of keep up with what's happening in the field that I work in. I also do general kind of non-technical documents, reports, birth and marriage certificates for people, invoices and things which are not too much technical jargon. Sometimes translate people's PhDs if they're not too technical. But that's the main thing, that you need to have areas of expertise besides the languages themselves. And then when it actually goes to translating a book, so first, when I'm approached to translate a book, first I'll have to read around the subject. So I would consult existing works in the field, make sure I'm not kind of reinventing the wheel if there's already terms that have been coined by other translators before me, making sure I'm thoroughly acquainted with the subject matter. I'll read the book first, once or twice at least, before I even touch or think about translating. And then there's just a lot of kind of strategy and analysis that goes. So I've got to understand my target audience. Is it a lay person or academic? Is it for children or adults, Muslim or non-Muslim primary audience? Does it need a formal register or an informal? I've got to understand the aims of the original author or the editor. What were their aims behind writing this book? I've got to understand to what extent am I required to translate? So does it have to be a literal translation or just a rendition? How much do I have to localize that translation? Are there untranslatable terms that I should actually transliterate and not translate, which are unique in the source language? How much of my own kind of flair and creativity can I actually inject into the text, if at all, right? Did the author mean for it to be read in a certain style? Do I have to, if the author made it rhyme, can I make it rhyme in English as well? Do I have to adhere to a certain meter if the author, kind of included a meter? How much background information is the reader expected to already have? Do I need to include extra things in the footnotes as I translate by way of explanation? And then aside from that, I've got to make a note as I go along of like all the terms that I've translated so that I maintain consistency throughout. So a work like Tafsir al-Ayashi, which is 3 volumes this big, it took me a good 3-4 years, but then you forget at the beginning of the work how you've translated something. And then because it's something you do kind of every day, I just plod along and do a couple of hours or however long I'm spending on it. Some days, many, many hours, and some days not. So by the time you get to the end of it, now you can't remember, did I translate Jannah as heaven or paradise? Was akhirah afterlife or hereafter? Was tahara cleansing or purification? So it's so important to kind of maintain consistency and have kind of a glossary of terms for yourself as you go along. And so, yeah, when I translate, sometimes I'll churn out pages in one day, and sometimes I'll be stuck on one paragraph for days. So it does take a lot of perseverance, dedication, kind of ability to deal with your own boredom, knowledge of lexicons, technical dictionaries, knowing where to look when you're stuck and how to search effectively. So that's what goes into a book. When it goes to like translating documents and non-Islamic work, that's a bit different. So usually that kind of work comes to me through agency. So you've got to sign up with a translation agency. And now translation agencies have very strict protocols. So the project would be overseen by, say, a project manager. Sometimes it's like, they form part of a larger project. So different linguists will be translating the same document in different languages. But most agencies require that you use what are known as CAT tools. So CAT tools are computer-assisted translation tools. So think Google Translate, but much, much better. So they're huge databases of already translated terms in a software. So you've got to be proficient with the software. Otherwise, you don't get the contract. And you input the source text, and it just generates the output in the target language. And it comes up with matches for those phrases. Now, the thing is, you don't get paid for any matches, even if they're what's known as fuzzy matches. So even 50% matches you wouldn't get paid for. You only get paid for new translation over a certain percentage match. So it's only your innovation that you get paid for, but then the software saves that translation. So you're constantly being paid less and less, right? Because it comes up with better and better matches. So you're constantly shooting yourself in the foot and other translators the more you translate, which is, it's awful, because translation, unfortunately, is one career that's not artificial intelligence proof. So in these CAT tools, for example, Arabic to English is awful, right? A lot of the CAT tools don't actually have support for Arabic. And those that do, they'll jumble up the sentences, so you have to restructure them a lot of the time, because in Arabic, the verb comes first, for example. In English, it comes in the middle. But if the software says it's a match, then you can't argue with the machine. So that's what happens. And that's why you'll find in the translation industry in general, now we're talking not Islamic necessarily, but just general translation, the majority of people want to get into literary translation. So novels, poetry, anything that's kind of published by big publishers, plays, because it allows you that creativity, right? More expression. And you can actually, because that's something a machine can't do. A machine can't rhyme things for you. A machine can't kind of use flair or use synonyms for certain words, etc. And some publishers even pay royalties to translators if the author is not alive anymore. But generally, translators don't get royalties, Islamic world or otherwise. So literary translation is everybody's dream. But unfortunately, not many people get to do that. And yeah, like I said, it's not a career that's artificial intelligence proof.
So with this, is this a uphill industry or downhill? Because is the number of words finite or infinite or infinite?
So I'd say that when the way to do well in translation is to niche, right? So the more niche you are, the more technical your field, the better you'll do, right? But even then, medical translation, legal translation, there's a finite number of terms. But then obviously every year, now COVID and Corona and all of these will be added on. So, but yeah, these massive softwares save quite a large chunk of words that are translated. But what is still feasible is interpreting. So interpreting, which is the verbal translation of languages, oral translation, is still very lucrative and good, because again, that's something machines can't really do. And it's something that I wasn't able to go into because I'm not a native speaker of Arabic. So Arabic, as you may know, has lots of different dialects. And this has been one of my biggest struggles, is to master one dialect. So I've spent time in Syria, so I can speak, a little bit of the Lebanese kind of Syrian Levantine dialect. But then a lot of my friends are Iraqi, so a lot of Iraqi comes into it. And then you watch Egyptian shows, and then a little bit of Egyptian comes in. But I don't know enough of one dialect really well to be able to interpret for somebody, right? You can't kind of afford to make mistakes in translation.
Right.
And if something like how are you is different in dialects. The Lebanese will say kifik, niha, and the Iraqi will say shlonich, and the Misriya will say izayik, and the you know, Jazairi, I will say, you know, labas. And so it's like something simple as how are you is so different in dialects.
Right.
So that's why I didn't go down the interpreting route, because, you know, the native speaker is so much better. Whereas translating texts is something that where my strengths lie.
Right. And reading all those tafsir volumes, I think you're well on your way to becoming a sheikha. So thank you all for all those insights. We're going to go back to Sister Huda, who's going to be exploring some of your joys and challenges.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. And Sister Nazmina, we'll continue with you. You know, you highlighted so much of what goes into translating, and I think, you know, we can relate to you. Well, I can relate to you in a sense. You know, I've tried to like describe what yalla means to my English friends, and you know, we say that every day so many times, yet there's no way to translate that word. So I totally relate. But like in terms of your own struggles and challenges with learning language and translating, what do those look like, and what are the most enjoyable and exciting parts of this work?
So the most challenging parts of learning Arabic specifically has been, it's funny because I never, alhamdulillah, I never struggled with the regular things that people learning Arabic struggle with. I think from young, what I actually wanted to go into wasn't languages, it was sciences. And I have a mathematical brain. So in that respect, conjugations and sarf and nahu, i'rab, all of those things came quite easily. Where my challenges lay were in the dialects, because I just felt that I'd want to get the expression perfect. And it wasn't enough to, you know, when my friends would speak to me in Arabic, I spent too long thinking about it rather than just getting the words out. So the challenge would definitely have to be with the Amiya and with the different dialects. And because I'd sit there, you know, kind of thinking too much about where that word came from. But why do they say shlonich? But where did that come from? You know, and it wasn't until I understood that it came from shu launak, you know, what's your color today, that then it would kind of sink in and be like, okay, now I'm okay with using it. So dialects, definitely. And even when I did gain the confidence to be able to speak properly, I found that here in London, I can't find people to talk to. Like, you know, now I know that Taher does, you know, only speaks Arabic in his family, but the majority of my friends actually speak English at home. And when I ask them, you know, can we speak in Arabic together? We'll start maybe 5 minutes in Arabic, and then this conversation just flies away in English. So it's really difficult here to find people to talk to in Arabic. When I used to live in Iran, it was better because many of my friends were Iraqis who spoke no English at all. So that was great, but that didn't last very long. So that's the challenges that I faced in learning Arabic. The most challenging part of translation work is that coming up with that elusive kind of best technical term, or finding true equivalence between Arabic and English. So, you know, when you find a really good term, usually for me, it's either in the middle of the night, you know, it'll suddenly kind of just dawn on me, or after Fajr. It's just such a dopamine hit when I find that exact technical term, where I have to just quickly get my phone out and, you know, make a note of it or scribble it down. And the most exciting part of translation work, especially something as big as Tafsir al-Ayashi, which is my latest one, is when you see those months and years of kind of slog coming together in physical form, and then seeing, you know, people being able to learn and benefit from that, and, you know, having facilitated for somebody to be able to read a tafsir or gain knowledge somehow. There's just no greater buzz than that. You know, it just makes the years of hard work all worth it.
Yeah, I can only imagine, you know, all of that just coming in, like there's a physical, you know, manifestation of your hard work. So that's really beautiful. Let's move on to Brother Taher. I think, you know, many times people write poetry because, you know, it helps to get out, you know, strong emotions off their chest. And, you know, for some people, it's almost like therapy. Don't worry about it.
Sorry about
That's okay. Assalamu alaikum.
Salam.
But you know, writer's block can be a real thing for writers.
Yeah.
So, as someone who's had many years of experience writing and performing poetry, what would you say are the things that bring you joy, and what have you found to be the most challenging moments?
In terms of joy, it's that constant growth. Like you said, writing block happens, but if you work beyond it, there's always room for growth. So what I found is recently, I think about a year ago, I had a massive writer's block, and the only way around it was to kind of study and try to find original material to work with. And I thought the best place to look would be my native mother tongue, the Arabic language. And unfortunately, unlike Nazmina, I am not a polyglot. I am the opposite of that. I've got one language is in English, my mother tongue is Arabic, and I struggle with it. So I thought if I could delve into Arabic poetry and you know, the beauty of the Arabic language, that will give me some sort of motivation, inspiration to write more original English poetry. So that's exactly what I've done, but I struggled miserably to the point where I became really bitter about it. But I did start writing about Arabic concepts. So I was very familiar with the fact that there's 10 or more words for lion, or 100 words for camel, which is a fact, I didn't know that. But there's 100 words for camel, or 28 words for love. And I thought, you know what, let me explore the meanings and the deeper meanings of these definitions. And then hopefully that would inspire me to write something that can match up, even though the English language would never really match up, right? So while writing notes about particular concepts and Arabic words, I found out reading notes that those notes were poetry in themselves. So I was writing about the 28 words of love, and each word of love became a poem in its own accord. And then I started sharing that with social media. You can find them on my Instagram page. So there's 2 series of 14 words of love and 14 more words of love. And I looked at a concept like the moon as well. And it created this beautiful series of poetry based on Arabic concepts. So what brings me joy would be things like this, like me accidentally stumbling across a whole world of poetry that exists as the halfway space between Arabic and English. And funny enough, so only somebody like me who doesn't fully understand Arabic, because you know, we were born as diaspora, would struggle and be able to write fitting English poetry about it. So I've created this middle ground. And it's beautiful in itself, and I'm hoping this would eventually become a book. So there's plans in the pipeline to release a book called The Names, which would be a compilation of all these poems that I've done over the past year. So that's what brings me joy. The challenges would be my son interfering in calls like this. Yes. Wow. But yeah, I've got a lot of challenging stories if you want to hear it, but I don't know if that's the next question or.
I think you shared a lot of really amazing, challenges and joys, and I can really, relate to when you find that one thing you've been looking for, or you come across that knowledge that really sparks your interest. It can feel so good and make you feel so grateful. But Sister Sahar, for you, you also post a lot of really amazing things on your Instagram, and you share videos and pictures of kids reading your book, and sometimes families doing that as well. And it must also feel so special to see those children benefiting from your book. So for you, what part of your work brings you happiness, and what are the difficulties of being an author and a publisher?
So in terms of what makes it all best is really a lot of the times we don't see ourselves as tools in the community, that like God has really blessed you with the opportunity to actually provide knowledge and make a difference in the community, so that chain effects can actually occur. So really it's just the thought that gratitude that trusting in God can get you somewhere, and He will therefore actually provide you with what you require as well. And so honestly, when girls actually do read the book, it's the most amazing feeling in the world, of course. I do try to dissociate that this isn't my work, that this is God's work, really, and I'm just a tool. So that's what the concept that I was trying to bring forward. But girls having the opportunity, Muslim females having the opportunity at a young age, at 9 years old, there's honestly no literature for them to actually grow and learn about the hijab in a safe environment, and learn about it more than it just being a safety mechanism from the male's gaze, which is very destructive because feminism can easily break that when they come into Western culture. And so that foundation for girls was never available properly, other than just going to the mosque and listening to lectures or going to Saturday schools. Alhamdulillah, now I'm finding so many more books being published, and it's so important that there never becomes this like it's a contest. Like you get dissatisfied if someone else publishes a book, or like, why didn't I think about that? It should always be the more the better, honestly, because it's only until everyone actually appreciates the other person's work is that we can actually work together to create something better. Creating the book was very difficult because there was not enough support, unfortunately, from a business analytical perspective. Not a lot of Muslims are actually in this field. And so the people I did contact, most of them are either, just barely trying to get through, or they've been doing it, but they're not actually have the free time enough to actually provide you with the full support. So a lot of it was taken from a Western perspective and then just morphed to make it actually work with the Muslim community. In terms of the benefits of it, it's really, as I said, it's just an honor to be able to help girls out with such an important concept. The goals of public figs and olives publications is, right now this book, there's actually another version coming out in a couple of months. It's going to be the Wise Prayer So Special, and so then it's going to be consecutive. There's also another book series that's going to be published very soon, to enter his gardens, and this is actually someone that had contacted me to actually publish her book, and so I'm working with her on that role. And the goal of Figs and Olives publication is really to actually move from only providing books to actually provide courseware and workshops. So I'm actually working with several other mosques to provide workshops for the girls that became 9 years old and need to start learning about the hijab. And so courses like that are happening where I personally find so much benefit for the girls, rather than them just going to a workshop that's really not targeted directly for the concept of the hijab.
Yeah, that's so beautiful, thinking about the impact, but also being part of that process where you are having, you are changing the lives of young people. And like you said, sometimes doing it without that much physical reward, like material reward, but a lot of it comes from seeing the impact of your work.
Yeah.
So let's move. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry to cut you out. I just realized, like, now I understand where that passion is coming from and why you're able to be successful at being an author. Yeah, you've really pushed, I don't know any terms, but you've really pushed the boundaries and willpower here. What we appreciate about each of our esteemed guests today, you guys, is that you've each used your talents and skills with language and words in a fashion to promote messages and benefit the community. So you've used your intellectual powers for good. One only has to look at your previous work or your current work to see its connection to Islam. So we wanted to know how Islam serves as a motivation for you guys, and how you guys do your work. So starting with Brother Taher, reciting poetry is something very common in Islam and Arabic in general. And it's also one of the practices that's been used by many of the followers of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam for many centuries. And you yourself have written pieces on the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. So for you personally, how does Islam motivate you and your work?
For me, Islam will always be forever a large part of my identity. Like I said, I started writing poetry about my relationship with God and inadvertently my relationship with the Ahlul Bayt. And that kind of started me off on the path of poetry. So I'll forever be grateful to Islam and where it positions itself in my identity and my poetry as a whole. Recently, when I delved into the academic side of poetry, a lot of it revolved around looking at other concepts of poetry, not necessarily Islamic or related to the religion, organized religion or spirituality as a whole. And I've met a few professors and a few peers, and most of them encouraged me to step away from the kind of religious sphere. And then I've got my community on the other side telling me, you're writing things that aren't religious, step away from that. So I've got two kind of opposing factions, and my son opposing me as well, just convincing me that the path I should take is their path and their path alone. So like I said, my community, they support me all along, but when I write about things like the concepts of love, they're like, is that really necessary? Is that really encouraged? Should that be something that we can encourage the younger poets? So I understand their reservations at times, but poetry at the end of the day is your intimate relationship with writing and the pen in general. So if it's something that you feel is relevant and the poetry itself is important enough to share, then you should share it. So I told the same thing to my academic tutors and professors that, at the end of the day, Islam will always be part of my identity. So I will express it in my poetry, how I see fit. And people learn, so that used to handicap me when it comes to access to the more mainstream audience, especially here in the UK. But people have learned to accept this part of me now. So I've got people that follow my poetry from the West that aren't necessarily Muslim or not religious at all. And then I've got also the kind of more Muslim, the people from Muslim backgrounds that appreciate my poetry for what it is. But yeah, so I've tried to delve into both spheres, but Islam will always be the focal point of where I take inspiration from. And I really apologize about some professors. But yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Inshallah. So to write or not to write about the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. Sister Sahar, what inspirations do you take from the Islamic faith to do the work that you do as an author?
Yeah, honestly, it's all rooted within Imam Mahdi, and I think that's really where I get a lot of inspiration, is that if the Imam were to return right now and he were to ask me, what have you been doing while I was away, while I was waiting for you, I need to find a response. And I feel like that's such a critical reflection that a lot of Muslims should always have. And it should never be that, I made one book and then that's enough. It should always be, okay, then what are you going to do after that? And what are you going to do after that? So always, I'm not perfect. I have a lot of my mistakes. I have a lot of issues that I'm figuring out. However, it's a process of working through it to always better yourself and to allow yourself to do mistakes, but rather see that's not where you're stopping, that there's actually an end goal after that. And so in Islam, I really feel that God's attribute of mercy and God's attribute of gratefulness, it really allows you to reflect and so much and really aspire. So definitely everything revolves around Imam al-Mahdi, because he is the Imam of our time, and so we serve him. So it should always be that conscious mindset.
Yeah, that is a very deep and perspective-putting question to ask. Sister Nazmina, what inspirations do you draw from Islam when it comes to learning languages and choosing what to translate and write?
So in terms of when it comes to learning languages, my impetus for learning Arabic in the first place was to be able to understand Islamic texts more than anything else. And I've been very, very blessed that most of the translations that I've been commissioned to translate to date are translations that are either to do with the Quran or hadith of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. You know, that's aside from, you know, the little documents and things like that, but alhamdulillah, that I've been blessed to do that, which, you know, is a blessing that I get to immerse myself in a hadith of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam 24/7. And I feel that that's as a direct result of the dua of my parents, in that when growing up, and I remember my dad was, you know, so kind in the way that he would humor me in any career path that I would think about. So this is kind of between the ages of 15 and 17, 15 and 18, and I, you know, think about what career I'd like to go into. And, you know, one day I'd have this brainwave, Dad, I'm going to be a journalist. And be like, that's amazing. We need journalists. And that, you know, that's how you're going to serve the path of Imam Mahdi, same as what Sister Sahar was saying. You know, and you can be a journalist that's, you know, pro-Muslims. And then the next day I'd be like, oh, no, I want to be an electronic engineer. And he'd be like, we need that because, you know, you can go and you can look into satellites and you'll be able to, you know, preempt when Imam Mahdi's coming and you can help his cause. And, you know, and they'd come out with something else. So alhamdulillah that my dad's always kind of drummed that in us from when we were young as to how are you going to serve with the skills that you have. It's fine, you can do whatever career you want, but, you know, he just put a spin on it, on how I could serve Islam with that, you know. So I believe it's as a result of his du'as that, you know, I get to work with the Quran and hadith of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. And now more recently, again, I feel so blessed in that I get to teach Arabic. And I think I love teaching Arabic even more than translation, because it's not just kind of putting a finished work out into the world, but it's empowering others to understand the Quran and Islamic texts when they read, rather than having to rely on translations. And I cannot express enough how much Arabic has done for me in my relationship with Allah, in being able to read du'as without having to constantly kind of go back and forth between the English and the Arabic, where I can immerse myself in what I'm reciting because I understand it, or what it's done for my relationship with Allah through the Quran. And I want others to be able to experience that. So in that sense, it's that which dictates what I do now, is, you know, being able to empower others and being able to serve the cause. And I can't thank Allah enough for that opportunity, and putting me, like Sister Sahar said, you know, the ability to be a tool in his hands is just one of the greatest blessings.
Right, indeed, there is good times to be a tool. So let's head over to Sister Huda. We're going to be taking some questions from the audience who've been listening or tuning in. So let's go ahead and get started with those questions.
You'll get started. I just wanted to quickly comment on Sister Nazmina's what you just shared right now, because I think there was something really important that you said, which is, you know, the approach of your parents was, okay, you want to do this. How are you going to serve Islam at the end of the day? And I think having that sort of as the guide, as the guiding principle for what you choose for your career is so much more important than, for example, money or like status that you're going to get out of a job. You know, a lot of times I've seen people who have went into the sciences, but they love something else. And they went to the sciences because that's kind of like the right thing to do as young people, or that's what the expectations of their parents were. But, you know, even just this panel, you know, you're in literature, and, you know, you're doing such amazing things, even though it's not maybe seen as the top, one of the top 3 choices that your children should kind of go into. So I really appreciate that you highlighted that. But I'll move into questions so that we can give the audience some voice here. Starting with Sister Sahar. Some people are wondering whether publishers have certain preference for certain types of books. So what do publishers consider to be good enough books, and do they accept certain types of books over others?
So every single publishing company works differently. So they all have like a specialty that they would work on. So yeah, definitely when someone wants to actually see which publishing company to go with, they actually have to scout as to what that preferable audience is. For instance, at the moment, mine is that I prefer to work with children literature, especially between the ages of 8 to 14, because I feel like there's not enough literature for that extremely important age group. So I'm not really looking forward to working with higher ages or to larger audience. And a lot of the times publishers work on the basis of how many clients they can actually take at the same time. So if they're already contracted with a couple of clients, they won't actually take more. So that's why they may actually delay that contract with you a couple of years or something. So truly with publishing, and especially publishing with a publishing house, you're gonna get rejected a lot before you actually get an okay. So it's very important to have that open mind, and it's very important that to have the idea that they are going to critique your work, and you have to be willing to accept that criticism with an open heart and open mind. Yeah, so it's a teeter-totter, really.
Yeah, definitely. And Sister Nazmina, I think this question is pretty head on to what you were talking about. Considering the poetic richness of language like Arabic, Urdu, and Farsi, do you feel a certain burden for the relatively newer English language to reach the poetical richness of the others? So,
Yeah, definitely. It's no easy task at all to convey even a fraction of what Arabic can convey very concisely. So a single Arabic word or two words will carry so much meaning. And it's very hard to put that into less than 6-7 words in English. I've come across so many phrases, so many words that are actually untranslatable. You've got to give 2 or 3 words in English to be able to encapsulate that. And that's without going into, the lyricism or the poetry of, when they're actually arranged in verse. That's something else totally. This is just looking at them as words, and the morphology, the root meaning of them, when they're arranged, for in a sentence, when a certain word precedes or comes first. In Arabic, that has a lot of meaning, the emphasis that's put when it comes in the beginning, as opposed to when it comes at the end. And so things like that we can't capture in English. It's practically impossible. So there are many untranslatables in English, but you try your best, and that's all you can do. When I'm translating, actually, I have to really kind of hold myself back from putting essays and explanations in the footnotes, because I want to explain everything as to why I've chosen that particular word. But you can't do that. Translator doesn't have that much license to fill the footnotes with explanations for what they've done. But often it's kind of trying to justify my choice of words because I can't pin one down.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I think one me and my sister were talking about from the Quran is sayakfiyakahum, which is like a whole sentence in itself. Like he's enough for you, so it's very difficult. But questions for Brother Taher. How does your poetry and the values it reflects connect with your Arab or Bahraini identity? And as a second question, how does poetic pieces facilitate your understanding and analysis of the poetry of the Quran?
If you could repeat that second question.
How does the poetic pieces facilitate our understanding and analysis of the poetry of the Quran?
Oh, that's interesting. I'll start with the first one about my Bahraini Arabic heritage. Like I said, I'm exploring the heritage surrounding my Arabic heritage when it comes to language, day by day, with piece by piece. And I've recently started to explore my Bahraini heritage as well in a few poems I'll release very soon. But yeah, delving into your past, like as in your origins and where your parents are from, brilliant, fertile land to explore when it comes to poetic devices and poetic tools, because you start to look at memories, you start to look at what you anticipate and imagine your parents went through and their parents went through. So there's a whole world to explore poetically. But when it comes to the Quran, for your second question, that's a difficult one, because at the end of the day, you know, the Quran has its poetic meter, it has its poetic origins. There's a point where, I think in Surah Al-Baqarah, where God himself challenges the poets to come with a chapter as powerful as Surah Al-Baqarah, and he's like, come with witnesses to testify. So poetry can never do the Quran any sort of justice. There's actually a series of poetry. There's actually a series I'm exploring this Ramadan, inshallah, where it's a minute of poetry to explore a chapter, which is incredibly difficult. But I thought it's unique, it's a challenge for myself to try and explore one chapter of the Quran in 1 minute of poetry. So that's something I'm going to be exploring very soon. I've started Surah Al-Fatiha and somehow managed Surah Al-Baqarah in 1 minute of English poetry. So it's a difficult task, and nobody could ever, you know, do it justice or explain the poetic devices in the Quran, but we can take a glimpse from that, learn from it, and try to reflect it and mirror it as best we can. So I hope that, you know, it's a difficult question to answer, but I hope I tackled it well enough.
Yeah, I hope it makes sense to me, at least. So, Sister Nazmeen, there's a question here that is asking for particular steps. So what are the steps you take to translate a religious text?
So to translate a religious text, so it, like I was saying, it's just not enough to know just language, or just know the Arabic language. You've got to read around the subject. So, for example, for Tafsir al-Ayashi, I had to read other tafasir at the same time, both in Arabic and in English, to make sure that I understand what Ayashi was saying, because this is a classical text that dates back to the time of Ghaibat al-Sughra. So you're talking like, 3rd century after Hijrah, very, very early text. So it requires knowledge of the Arabic language of that time, it requires knowledge of ahadith terms, how people spoke, and how they transmitted ahadith in those times. So being thoroughly acquainted with the subject matter, and then to read around and make sure that I'm not kind of reinventing technical terms that already exist, that have been adopted into the field and that people are thoroughly familiar with, and then I go and kind of reinvent it when it's not necessary. So making sure that I know my material very well. Also making a glossary of technical terms that come up, that's really important, and it's standard and consistent throughout. And of course, it's going to be different if you're translating a fiqh text, which alhamdulillah I've done and which will be published soon, as opposed to if you're translating a tafsir text. So again, when I was doing the fiqh text that I did recently, it's understanding actual Islamic legal terminology. We're only familiar in our day-to-day life with, ibadat, really, what we know in terms of Bab al-Tahara and Bab al-Salat, Bab al-Sawm, Hajj, if you go for Hajj, and, you read those. But I had to kind of really read around the subject matter. I had to learn all about mortgages in Arabic. I had to learn all about leases and all about business terminology and business terminology of that time, all about kind of all the transactions that go on or used to go on in those days. I had to learn a whole another world about slavery and the slave trade, and how slaves used to buy their own freedom or when they could, and the kind of contracts that there were. I had to learn all about inheritance and all the different terminology that comes up with inheritance. And so, you have to thoroughly acquaint yourself with the subject matter before you can even open the book and start translating. So that's kind of the background preparation that goes into it. And then when you actually translate, then it's, sometimes it'll come easily where I'll be able to, quite fluidly translate entire passages. And sometimes there'll be, one phrase or one paragraph will completely throw me off. And I have to spend a lot of time on it. So that's just some of the processes that go in. But obviously there's different things that come up when you're searching for that equivalence or being able to express equivalence in English, and in English that doesn't have equivalence of, certain practices even, how do you even have a single word for, say, for example, the practice of this pre-Islamic divorce called zihar, right? Where a man would say to his wife, "You are to me like my mother's back," right? And that was a way of divorce. But how do you express that in one term in English? You can't, because it's a whole concept. So, it's understanding the history behind these terms, and it's understanding the limitations of English too.
So it seems like you have to be an expert in a lot of things, or you have to be knowledgeable in a lot of things. So just one last quick question about publishing your translations. How do you do that? And would you recommend going through a particular organization or like a publishing company?
So alhamdulillah, again, I've been blessed in that most of the time I've been approached to translate something. So I've not had to kind of say, "Oh, I feel like translating this. Who can I approach?" It's the other way around. Alhamdulillah that, so most of my publications are either by ICAS Press, Islamic College in the UK, or Al Mahdi Publications, again in the UK. So they've commissioned me to translate a particular text, and then they take care of the editing and the publishing, etc.
Yeah. So there are Islamic publishers out there as well we can go through. Excellent. So now we want to move in sort of to the last part of the panel with the sharing of the work of each of these incredible writers and translators and authors. They're all actually authors. So we're going to start off with Sister Nazmina, and we're going to take a look at her Instagram page where she posts really amazing content, sort of little snapshots of translations and they're almost like mini lessons of the Quranic Arabic. So I'm going to share my screen right now so that you can take a look at her page. Let's do this. Can you all see that?
Yep.
Awesome. So this is her page, Arabic.online, and Arabic is spelled with a Q. And I think it's Arabic, like the Q is instead of the C to symbolize Arabic in the Quran specifically, if that's correct. Yeah, so, she has little snapshots like this where she will, take a word from the Quran, she'll give you a translation, and she's done a good job in keeping it to one word or two words for most of the posts. And, see, it's switching. So she goes into depth on what that, I don't know if you'll be able to hear it. Can you hear it?
You have to share sound.
So she speaks on top of this. So she's going into, the context of the word, where it comes up, and what it means. And she gives them more of a description of it here on the side. And so I'm not sure if you could hear it, but she's also describing it. So it's kind of like a video, like a mini lesson. And it's great, sort of every day you can, have a goal to learn one word and some of its context and its translations. But Sister Nazmina, why did you choose to do this format on social media and in this particular way?
So again, so this started last Ramadan. So before that, I wasn't even on Instagram. I was just one of these social media phobes, and I was on Facebook, but it's just not something that I had explored, that I could actually showcase my work on there, or I only saw Instagram for people putting up nice pictures of their houses and pictures of the food they ate and places they went, and that's it. So last Ramadan, when I was starting out with my course, and I was actually in the process of building my course that I teach, and I thought, you know what, for Ramadan, why not just do a word of the day? So every day in Shahr Ramadan, I put a word out, and just the meaning of it, how many times it occurs in the Quran, the context in which Allah uses it, and just kind of put it out there, not kind of expecting anything. And the response was amazing. And I, again, not having been on Instagram at all, I didn't even know whether there were Arabic accounts like that that existed. I didn't know, what people were doing. I literally just went in with my eyes closed and kind of, hey, this is Instagram, I'm here, and put it on there. And alhamdulillah, it's taken off, because as soon as Shahr Ramadan finished, and I thought, okay, that's it, it's done. And I had people actually messaging me and saying, why have they stopped? Can't you continue? And I thought, oh, this isn't sustainable. I can't do this every single day. So then I started every Friday. So every Friday I post a different word. And people asked me to start a mailing list, and please, can you send it to us by email? And so, I started that. And then now, alhamdulillah, it's a platform to share things that are happening with the course, which I've just launched recently. So the course is all about teaching specifically Quranic Arabic in a self-paced way. So people don't have to worry about time zones or Zoom calls or live lessons or anything, but they still get the experience of a teacher teaching them via video lessons, exercises, quizzes, all of that, their own kind of student dashboard. And for those who don't want to, they can still get, the word of the day and get an education in Quranic words.
I love that. Yeah, like I really find these as a way to like learn without having that huge commitment. And then if you want a little bit more commitment, there is that the course that you're teaching. But even then, I think it's pretty flexible. Especially, I think you've targeted women specifically with that course, but it's open to everyone, correct?
It is open to everyone. It's only that my students have always been females, So for that, but otherwise, there's nothing in the course itself that makes it exclusively to women.
Okay.
But it's there because most of my students have been busy women. But I actually have a discount code for students. So if they use the discount code TMA Student 10 for the next 48 hours, they can get 10% off. They'd like to sign up.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. And this is the benefit of coming to Careers and Passions panels. You get discounts. So thank you so much for sharing that. I'm going to pass the floor over to Sister Sahar, who will do a reading of her book, Why is the Hijab So Special? Nope, you're on mute. You're on mute. We can't hear you. You're muted.
Yeah.
There you go.
It's time to find the dashboard.
I'm sorry.
So I just wanted to show the book before I start. So this is generally how the book looks. It's pretty lengthy. It's not an easy read, but it discusses all a complete philosophy of the hijab from the beginning to the end. It also comes with this cute pen, just as a souvenir for the lovely girls and boys. So towards the end of the book, just to provide some context, the girl is Leia, and she's trying to discover why the hijab is obviously special, because she's going to turn 9 years old. And so she's feeling afraid. She's starting to get worried. Why do I have to wear this? What's the purpose of this? What about those that don't wear it, etc. And so she goes on this journey asking people and asking those around her to figure it out. So towards the end of the book, she actually goes and talks. She's in the mosque and she's talking to a respected sister. And the sister tells her, let's say that I had a present for you on your 9th birthday. Wouldn't you be super excited to turn 9 years old? Yes, definitely, Leia exclaimed. Well, what if on your 9th birthday, the gift was promised to you from Allah instead? Then the gift would be even more special. Well, Allah does give each and every one of us a gift, the hijab. The gift is so special because it will help you on our journey towards our spiritual perfection. Spiritual perfection, asked Leah. Yes, that's the purpose of the dunya, our life on earth, to reach our full potential. Allah tests us to choose between right and wrong, and it's up to us to strengthen our ability to stay away from sins. Sister Kawthar paused for a moment. Let's say you were put in a very dark room. How would that make you feel? Oh my, I'd feel very afraid, maybe even terrified. I've never liked being in the dark alone. Who knows what could be in there with me? Well, what if I put you in the meadows filled with blooming flowers and sunshine? How would you feel then? I'd feel very happy and relaxed. I'd want to smell all the flowers and roll down the hills, replied Leah cheerfully. Now, this is where I'd like you to focus. Would you know what fear felt like if you had not experienced being trapped in the dark room before? Or would you know what happiness felt like if you had never experienced running through the meadow before? Leah paused for a moment. I don't think I would. I only pictured the feeling of happiness and fear because I have experienced these situations in the past. Exactly. And that is why Allah has placed us on this earth. Unless we are put through tests, we won't truly know if we deserve to go to heaven. So we need to prove ourselves worthy of going to heaven, asked Sahara. We do. Allah wants you to know that wherever you end up in the hereafter, it's because of the decision you made in this dunya. The hijab is one of the ways that Allah tests us, replied Sister Kawthar. So then it just continues. It's like I said, it's a very lengthy book. It's made with some comic reliefs, but it's a really, really great tool for boys and girls to actually learn about the hijab completely.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It really, I think it gets into that mindset of the fear that, or the anxiety or nervousness that girls may feel at the beginning of that journey, and really addresses those. I'm going to hand it off now to Brother Taher to read some of his amazing poetry, inshallah.
Fingers crossed we don't get any interruptions. So I thought about sharing my earliest spoken word poem. So I was about 17 when I wrote this, so that's what, 13 years ago? I thought since we're discussing development of writing, this would be a good poem to share. So it starts like this. Oh Ali, who are you to me, that I call myself your Shi'i, that I'll skip oceans like puddles and make nothing of sea, or how soft you drive my heart to be, but oh Ali, who are you to me? Who are you to me that I'd gift every string of my soul, every strand, I'd give up what I have and all that's planned, I'd break my heart from stone to sand, so soft I'd break it under your command, as soft as a petal inside your hand, but oh Ali, who are you to me? Am I not your bird that daily sings and flies your name with my silken wings? Am I not your wind that blows and brings? Am I not all these things? But oh Ali, who are you to me? To truth, you are the gravity. You're my logic, yet insanity. You're the atoms in this heart's cavity. You're the human in humanity, yet an angel in my heart's calamity. But oh Ali, who are you to me? You're the solver of my equations. You're the riser to my heart's occasions. You're my escape from this world, my evasions. You're the words that act as my persuasions. You, Ali, are my heart's invasion. But oh Ali, who are you to me? You unravel the mysteries of my spiral genetics. To the heart wound, you are its anesthetic. You're the inspiration to love and poetics. You're the digits of humility and bravery's alphabetics. You're the prophecy by the prophet's own prophetics. But oh Ali, who are you to me? You're the A and you're the L in my eyes' contractions. You're the reason for my current actions. You're the sound followed by no distractions. You're the story written within my heart like factions. You're its corners drenched by your paint like holy abstractions. But oh Ali, who are you to me? You're the name that saves us from ourselves, giving comfort and protection within our shells. You're the start of a never-ending 12. You're Muhammad's name that's near and far. You're his commandeering star from time's first breath to its breathless end. Now do I still ask who you are? Now do I still ask who you are? So that's the first spoken word piece I've written about the Ahlul Bayt, 13 years ago.
MashaAllah, that is That is so beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And honestly, I feel like Imam Ali makes everyone a poet because of his love. But those words are really touching. Thank you for sharing those. So I think that brings us to the end of the panel. And just a quick question before I hand it over to Brother Ali Basit to kind of finish us off. Sister Sahar and Brother Taher, where can we get your books? So Sister Nazmina, we've posted a link to your course on our social media so people can access that. But where can people access your books?
Amazon for me. So you can just type in Lost and Found, and there should be a link on Google. If not, on my Instagram, there's a little link tree to where you can purchase it, and it will be Amazon, the book repository, and all these distributors online.
Awesome. So I'll put a link to the Amazon book, inshallah.
So thank you so much for Brother Taher for the beautiful poetry. That was extraordinary. And so for my book, they can go on my website, fopublications.com, and then it has links for UK. We do sell in UK and we do sell in Canada and America, but we do also ship worldwide. So I will personally ship them. And alhamdulillah, they've been to Qatar and Bahrain and all over globally. So the shipping will inshallah reach them.
All right, so we will also put a link to that, inshallah. Thank you.
Inshallah. Brother Taher, I don't know how you made it work. I was told Amazon is not a very good business decision.
Luckily for me, it's not just Amazon. So hopefully, it can be I think it's distributed internationally in a number of places. But if Amazon is your primary distributor for books, then that's the best way to
Inshallah. And that brings us to the end of this panel, which is, as always, the saddest part of the program, at least for myself. Thank you so much to our wonderful panelists for joining us today and sharing your valuable, invaluable experiences and knowledge about writing and translating with us. And thank you to the audience for tuning in. We hope you found this session as informative, exciting, and enjoyable as we did. Join us tomorrow morning at the same time for our next panel featuring artists, Islamic artists, and calligraphers as we talk to them about the process of learning Islamic art and calligraphy, the challenges of being an artist, and the connection between their art and the Islamic faith. And as always, don't forget to check out our Instagram page at Career Panel, where we will post all the information you need to know about upcoming panels, as well as amazing coffee and tea recipes by Sarah's Kitchen, made especially for this event. Thank you again for tuning in, and we'll see you tomorrow, inshallah, same time.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.